The information we're covering today is current at the time of presentation, but may be subject to change, so we ask you to always please refer to the Immigration New Zealand website for the most up-to-date information. All right, let's get started. Most of you will have been granted a student e-visa, so let's start by looking at what an e-visa is. An e-visa is an electronic visa. It allows you to travel to New Zealand, enter the country, and stay for the period approved on your visa. On the screen, you'll see an example of a student e-visa. Your visa is an important document, and it's your responsibility to understand the conditions attached to it. Every visa includes a set of conditions that outline what you can and cannot do while you're in New Zealand. Your visa will also include important information such as when your visa becomes valid, how long you can stay in New Zealand, how long your travel conditions remain valid, any work rights you may have, and the date by which you must leave New Zealand. Understanding these conditions is important, as complying with them helps ensure you maintain your lawful status while studying in New Zealand. Over the next few slides, we'll walk through each section of the visa and explain what the different conditions mean and what they mean for you as an international student. First, we'll take a closer look at the validity dates and travel conditions on your student visa. The first date you'll see is the visa start date. This is the date your visa becomes active and can be used. In this example, the student's visa starts on the 17th of February 2026. Next, you'll see your travel conditions. These tell you whether you can enter New Zealand once or multiple times while your visa remains valid. There are two types of travel conditions. Single entry means you can enter New Zealand only once on that visa. After you've arrived, if you leave New Zealand, you won't be able to return on the same visa, even if it hasn't expired. Multiple entry means you can travel in and out of New Zealand as many times as you like while your visa remains valid. In this example, the student has a multiple entry visa, giving them the flexibility to leave New Zealand and return during their studies. You'll also see a travel expiry date. This is the last day you can enter or re-enter New Zealand using that visa. In our example, if the student is outside New Zealand, the final date they can return using this visa is the 14th of March 2027. Another important date is the visa expiry date. This is the last day you can legally remain in New Zealand on that visa. In this example, the visa expires on the 14th of March 2027. By that date, the student must either leave New Zealand or hold another valid visa, such as a new student visa or an interim visa while another application is being processed. For most student visas, the travel expiry date and the visa expiry date will be the same. However, they can sometimes be different, so it's important to understand what each date means. A simple way to remember is visa expiry date is the last day you can stay in New Zealand. Travel expiry date is the last day you can enter New Zealand. Your student visa is usually granted for the same period as the course or study program you've paid for. When you have a chance, take a look at your student visa and check the dates, conditions, and travel requirements that apply to you. Understanding your visa conditions will help you meet your responsibilities while studying in New Zealand. Now we'll look at some of the other conditions you may see on your student visa. It's important to remember that every visa is different. The conditions that apply to you are the ones listed on your own visa, so always take the time to read them carefully. In this example, inside the red box, you'll see the condition financial support evidence not required. This means that when you arrive in New Zealand, you'll not normally be asked at the border to provide evidence of your funds, such as bank statements or proof of income. However, this does not mean that you can arrive without sufficient money to support yourself. You must still have enough funds to cover your living costs throughout your stay in New Zealand, including accommodation, food, transport, and other day-to-day expenses. Another condition shown here is return onward ticket not required. This means you won't normally need to provide evidence of a return or onward ticket when you arrive at the New Zealand border. However, you're still required to leave New Zealand when your visa expires, and you will need a valid ticket to another country at that time. You'll also see the condition stay subject to grant of entry permission. This is an important condition that applies to most visa holders. Being granted a visa does not automatically guarantee entry into New Zealand. When you arrive, you must still be granted entry permission by a border officer. At the border, officers may check that you continue to meet your visa conditions and that you are a genuine student who intends to study in New Zealand. If they have any concerns, they may ask you for additional information or supporting documents, such as evidence of funds or travel arrangements, even if your visa says those documents are not required. If a border officer determines that you do not meet the requirements for entry, they can refuse entry permission. In that situation, your visa may be cancelled and you may be required to leave New Zealand. The key message is always read your visa conditions carefully, keep supporting documents available, and make sure you continue to meet the requirements of your visa throughout your stay in New Zealand. This final section of your visa outlines what you're allowed to do while you're in New Zealand. Let's start with the study conditions. These conditions specify the education provider you must study with, the program you must be enrolled in, and sometimes the location where you are required to study. You must only study according to the conditions listed on your visa. This means you need to remain enrolled with the approved education provider, attend the approved program of study, and study at the location specified in your visa conditions. In this example, the student is approved to study a Master of Information Technology at the University of Waikato in Hamilton. Studying a different program or changing providers without the appropriate approval could mean you are breaching your visa conditions. Another condition you may see relates to health and travel insurance. Most fee-paying international students are required to hold appropriate medical and travel insurance for the entire duration of their stay. This insurance must be in place from the start of your course until your visa expires and must meet the requirements of the Education Code of Practice 2021. Your education provider will either arrange insurance for you or tell you what level of cover is required. One important exception to this is for Doctor of Philosophy, PhD students who are not required to hold insurance as a condition of their student visa. In this example, the visa holder is required to maintain insurance throughout their stay. You'll also find information about work rights. If your student visa allows you to work while studying, this will be clearly stated on your visa. The number of hours you can work and when you can work will depend on the program of study and the conditions attached to your visa. We'll look at work rights in more detail shortly. Before we move on, there's one final and very important point. You must comply with all the conditions on your student visa. If you do not meet your visa conditions, you may become liable for deportation, and this could affect your ability to obtain visas in the future. Now we've covered how to read your visa conditions. Let's look at the work rights that may be available to students studying at a tertiary education provider, such as a university, Institute of Technology, Polytech, or Wānanga. So now I'll pass over to Nicole. Thanks, Nicole.
Kia ora koutou katoa, everybody. My name is Nicole. Thank you very much, Belinda. What is work? So work is an activity that you do for gain or reward. Examples of gain or reward includes receiving payment, such as a salary or a wage, accommodation, such as board or lodging, goods, such as food or clothing, and services such as transport. So that all is encompassed under the definition of work. So INZ defines full-time work as more than 30 hours and more per week. So at the bottom of your screen here, there is an INZ website link to a helpful glossary that might help you understand some of the key immigration terminology that we use. Part-time work for tertiary students. So you can work part-time for up to 25 hours per week if you are studying full-time for at least 2 academic years, or for a New Zealand qualification at level 4 or higher, or to develop English language skills in an eligible course, or for at least 1 semester as part of an approved exchange scheme or study abroad program. So most students applying for a student visa were granted 25 hours of part-time study conditions because they were studying a level 4 course or above. That is the most common criteria that our students meet to qualify for 25 hours of work a week. So you cannot work if you are in a training scheme or studying towards a micro-credential, and that's because these are not qualifications. Full-time work during the scheduled study breaks for tertiary students. So depending on your course and the conditions on your student visa, you may be able to work full-time during scheduled study breaks. So to be eligible, you must be studying full-time in a course that lasts at least 1 academic year and is worth at least 120 credits and includes at least 2 semesters delivered over a period of at least 8 months. Scheduled study breaks are the breaks that are built into your program by your education provider. So because study schedules vary from institution and programs, it's important to check with your own education provider if you're unsure whether a particular break is formally considered a scheduled study break. And it's also important to check your own visa conditions. If you are allowed to work full-time during the scheduled study breaks, this will be stated on your visa. Now we move on to working to get practical experience. So some courses in New Zealand include a practical work component as part of the qualification. This could be an internship, a work placement, a clinical placement, an industry project, or another form of practical experience that is required to complete your course. So if practical experience is a compulsory part of your program of study, Immigration New Zealand will normally grant a student visa with conditions that allow you to undertake that work. Before these work rights are granted, Immigration New Zealand must be satisfied that the practical experience is an approved and required component of your course, rather than just an optional employment option. It is important to remember that any work undertaken under these conditions must be directly related to your approved program of study and meet the requirements set by your education provider. If you are unsure whether a placement, a work internship, a practical component is covered by your visa conditions, please check your visa carefully and speak with your education provider or alternatively Immigration New Zealand before you start the work. Practical experience that forms part of your qualification is more often permitted under a student visa, but it must be an approved course requirement and you must comply with the conditions directly listed on your visa. Working when your course ends and your visa is still current. When a course finishes before a student visa expires, you need to check the work conditions attached to your visa to know if you can work in that break. Fee-paying students may be able to work full-time during that summer holiday period if their student visa remains valid and their visa conditions specifically allow full-time work during scheduled vacations. Having a current visa is not enough on its own to work that last summer. The work rights shown on the visa must also permit full-time work. If your student visa conditions only allow part-time work, for example, up to 25 hours a week, and it does not include permission to work full-time during scheduled vacations, then those same part-time limits continue to apply even after your course ends and while your student visa remains current. If you want to stay in New Zealand and continue working after your student visa expires, you may wish to explore your eligibility for a work visa, such as a post-study work visa or an accredited employer work visa. And work you cannot do while holding a student visa. So international students cannot be self-employed. You must work for an you must work for an employer and you must have an employment agreement. You also cannot provide commercial sexual services. So that also includes operating a business in that field or investing in a business in that field. So that covers some of the work that you can undertake while holding a student visa. I am now going to pass over to Phil for the last part of our presentation. Thank you, Phil.
Thanks, Nicole. Kia ora, I'm Philip. I'm an engagement partner and I'm based in Christchurch. Next, we'll talk about keeping safe in the workplace. To help you find a good employer and understand your rights at work, we recommend you follow this advice. Be aware of exploitation. Migrant workers are exploited when their employer takes advantage of them or treats them unfairly and it causes harm to the worker. This harm can be economic, for example, not being paid the right amount, or sometimes not at all. Social, for example, being isolated from other people. Physical, for example, being forced to work long hours with no breaks. Or emotional, for example, being threatened or made to feel afraid. When workers' employment rights are not respected, or when employers don't meet minimum employment standards or meet health and safety or immigration requirements, workers are being exploited. Know your rights. Migrant workers have the same minimum employment rights as New Zealand workers. This means that migrant employees have the right to a written employment agreement, to be paid minimum wage if you're 16 years or older, paid rest breaks and unpaid meal breaks, sick leave, bereavement leave, parental leave, and domestic violence leave, public holidays, 1.5 times your normal pay rate plus another day off if you work on a public holiday that is normally a working day, and 4 weeks of paid annual leave. Your employer must not take money out of your pay unless it's lawful, reasonable, and you ask for it, or agree to it in writing, or it's required by law. Your employer must not make you pay to get or keep your job. A fee like this is sometimes referred to as a premium. These rights apply to everyone. They cannot be taken away from any employee. Don't pay for a job. It is against the law. Do not give your passport to your employer. Keep it and other documents in a safe place. Where possible, keep copies of your passport and New Zealand issued visa. An employer must give you a copy of your employment agreement, so make sure you keep this in a safe place. Keep a record of all hours and days you work and what you are paid, including the amount and dates you are paid and any amount your employer takes out of your pay. If you can, have your wages paid directly into a personal bank account. This protects your money and can help you keep track of your wage payments. If you are paid by cash, write down the date, time, and who paid you the cash payments, and where possible, get evidence of the cash being paid to you. Be aware that just having a job does not guarantee a pathway to residence or citizenship. Be careful of promises made by some employers, immigration advisors, lawyers, or agents, particularly if they're located offshore, or they ask you for money to get a job or to guarantee residency. You can also check the Immigration New Zealand website on how to avoid immigration scams. Here are some key resources for you to look at. You can check your rights as an employee on the Employment New Zealand website. If you or someone you know has experienced migrant exploitation, you can report it over the phone on the 0800 number shown on the screen. Our contact centre is open Monday to Friday from 8 o'clock in the morning till 5:30 in the evening, except on public holidays. If you'd like to speak to someone in your own language, call the 0800 number and say the language you speak. Interpreters are available for over 180 different languages. You can make a report to Employment New Zealand using that online form. And really importantly, if someone is in immediate physical danger, call 111 and ask for the police. Now we'll look at changing your student visa conditions. If you're staying with the same education provider and making a relatively minor change, such as changing your course or study location, you may be able to apply for a variation of conditions rather than a new visa. There is an application fee of $325, and a variation of conditions does not change your student visa expiry date. When you apply to change your visa conditions, Immigration New Zealand will assess your circumstances before making a decision. They'll look at whether you still meet student visa requirements, whether you've followed the conditions of your current visa, and whether you genuinely intend to continue studying in New Zealand. If you're changing providers, they may also consider why the change is needed and whether there are circumstances beyond your control. Applicants who received New Zealand scholarship funding in the past 2 years prior to their application to change the program of study or education provider must provide evidence that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Trade or Education New Zealand supports the change and that the scholarship remains valid. Importantly, don't stop studying or move to a new course until Immigration New Zealand has approved the change. Some changes are too significant to be approved through a variation of conditions. In these situations, you'll normally need to apply for a completely new student visa. Examples include changing to a lower level qualification, moving to a different education provider, needing extra time to complete your studies, or if your current visa is close to expiring. You will normally also need a new visa if your study program will finish much earlier or much later than originally approved. If you hold a pathway student visa and want to change education providers, you'll also need to apply for a new student visa. The fee for a new student visa is approximately $850. Up until now, we've been talking about changing the conditions of your student visa or applying for a new student visa. However, there are some situations where a student visa may no longer be the right visa for what you want to do in New Zealand. A student visa is generally intended for full-time, on-campus study with an approved education provider. If you're planning to move to part-time study, switch to distance or remote learning, or spend most of your time studying outside New Zealand, you may need to consider a different visa option. For example, student visas are normally granted for full-time study. If you want to study part-time, you can't simply change your study schedule and continue on the same visa. In many cases, you may need a visitor visa and, if approved, a variation of conditions that allows part-time study. Similarly, if you're studying mainly through distance learning or correspondence, or you're based overseas and only need to come to New Zealand for a practical component or an examination, a different visa type may be more appropriate depending on your circumstances and length of stay. You may also need a different visa if your purpose for staying in New Zealand changes after your studies finish. For example, once your course is ended, your student visa doesn't automatically allow you to remain in New Zealand indefinitely. If you would like to stay longer to attend your graduation ceremony, spend some time traveling, or visit friends and family before returning home, you may wish to apply for a visitor visa. Some graduates may also be eligible for a post-study work visa, which allows them to work in New Zealand after completing an eligible qualification. We won't be covering post-study work visas in detail today, but we're planning a separate webinar on that topic later this year. The key message is that your visa should always match the reason you're in New Zealand. If your circumstances change, check whether a different visa may be needed before making any changes to your study or travel plans. Now that we've covered some of the common situations where you may need to apply for another visa, let's look at where you can go for help and support with your next application. You don't need an agent for your next student visa. You can apply yourself using the guides on the Immigration New Zealand website. If you need help, you can contact Immigration New Zealand. The numbers are on the screen. If you prefer to talk to someone in another language, as we mentioned before, you can tell us over the phone what your preferred language is, and make sure you stay on the line and you will be connected with an interpreter. However, if for any reason you require immigration advice, please use a licensed immigration advisor or a lawyer. You can find a licensed immigration advisor on the Immigration Advisors website and lawyers on the New Zealand Law Society website. The key message we always emphasize here is apply at least 3 months ahead of your travel date.
Thank you again for being part of our webinar. Your journey in New Zealand is just beginning and it's full of opportunities to learn, grow and connect, and we wish you every success in your studies and hope you create some unforgettable memories along the way. So thank you very much and ka kite.
Ka kite.